Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin. It's the month of June here in the Garden State. I never knew why they call New Jersey the Garden State, because there's not a lot of gardens around, but so be it. And I think that's a great trivia question. So this is volume 2 with Claude Blanc. And Claude and I, a month or so ago, we did volume 1. And I just said to Claude before we went on air, and you know what I said is that this should be a movie. I'm not a screenwriter, but the life you've lived and continue to live is so fascinating. And we've broken this up into 3 separate interviews. We could go on and on, but refreshing memories. Claude will do a quick recap. But in volume 1, we talked about his global early years in Africa, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Nepal. Today he's an amazing business consultant. I kind of extracted that he's had teams, he's led teams of 300 people in 30 locations, and he's played around with $1 billion budget. So he's quite an amazing businessman, but getting to this point is remarkably interesting. It should be a movie. So that's what we talked about on our first volume. And today is the return to the roots. And just looking at some of the things we're going to talk about, so interesting. It's like I want to yell with a megaphone, get away from TikTok and check this guy out, because it's been one hell of a journey. So my monologue is now finished, and Claude, take it away. Maybe just refresh a little quick bio and refresh a little bit of what we did last time, and now we will jump into your communal living.
Yeah, so last time we spoke a little bit about my childhood and the weird life I had with one foot in Africa, one foot in France. My parents were in Africa. Well, my father had died when I was a child, but my mother remarried, lived there, and I spent my life in boarding schools during the winter and in Africa in the summer, and it was very disturbing in many ways. So I turned out to be a mess as I was growing up in my teenage years, and got myself into all kinds of troubles until the day in which I came across the Bhagavad Gita, which is a book of Hindu spirituality that kind of gave me it was like an epiphany. Say, well, if what this book is talking about is true, my life could have a meaning. On that inspiration, I left to go to India from France, from Paris. I left to go to India through Turkey, Iran, went down to Kuwait, then Pakistan, Afghanistan, back in Pakistan, India, Nepal. And that journey was like a new birth for me. It was like a rebirth, And my guru in Nepal told me, look, what you're looking for, you need to go back to your own roots. And my own roots were in Christianity, right? So I was born a Christian, even though my family was pretty much agnostic and atheist. I had been baptized, and so I started looking into it again. Okay, and eventually found my way back to Europe. And so now here I was reading the Bhagavad Gita on one hand, and the Bible and the Christian scripture in the other, and trying to find the meaning of my life, basically, meaning of what the heck is going on around me. It took me many different places. I traveled from commune to commune, and with one commune, I ended up in Morocco. Wow. We were planning on building a village in central France. That whole thing fell apart, but then I moved to another commune, and then a friend of mine wanted to go and visit his girlfriend in Sweden. So I said, okay, I'll go along. I'll go with you. We had very little money, but we made it to Stockholm. But by the time we got to Stockholm, we were broke. We had nothing left, right? And so we had to get back home. The visit with the girlfriend didn't go very well. So here we were stuck in Stockholm, and we had to come back to France, right? Hitchhiking, going from place to place. And we one day going in a restaurant, in a coffee shop, going from table to table asking for rides. And one girl there said, "Oh, come with me." And she brought us to her home and said, "Look, here is the refrigerator. If you want to take a shower, go ahead and take a shower. I'm sorry, I've got to go because I've got some appointments. But when you leave, make sure you close the door and not let the cat run away." Right? Here we were. We didn't know that woman from a hole in the wall, and she left us in her home. The hospitality was amazing.
Wow.
And really, we didn't look very presentable, right? We really looked like, well, we did need to take that shower, okay? And so I had a little Buddha that I had brought back from Nepal, so that I was carrying with me, and we left it with a little note on the table to thank her, and moved on. But this was an amazing experience that I never forgot. I don't know what happened to that woman, obviously, but it was. And then many other episodes like this happened during that trip. We eventually found our way back to France, and I was living in a commune at that point, and one of the members of that commune was talking about his spiritual director was a Benedictine monk in Switzerland, and so at some point I said, well, why don't we go and see him? Because I was interested in finding out more about Christianity. And so here we were on our way to Switzerland. We arrived in that monastery. Again, we looked like bums, right? And they opened the door, they look at us and say, what do you want? But they took us in. And for me, it was an amazing experience. It was really a mystical experience, a conversion experience, but my life changed dramatically there. I had really to reevaluate everything I had done in my life and refocus. So, but where do I go from there? That one of the monks there, that spiritual director, gave us the name of a group in Paris, a community, and he said, "Well, you should get to know them." And so we arrived in Paris and met those people, and there were people trying to live a bit on the model of the early Christian communities, but in today's world, and it was pretty attractive. But then, I had quite a heavy drug experience with me, and I needed to kind of clean up my act and clean up, and the best way I found to do that was to get a job on a farm as a farm worker. So me and that guy and that friend of mine went to work on a farm. I thought, it was the idyllic view of being in nature, and really didn't turn out to be exactly that way, right? You spend 8 hours behind a tractor with spinning fumes, But it was a very strong experience. Again, a life-changing experience. Found my way back to Paris eventually. Got various jobs. I was fascinated by Simone Weil, who is a philosopher who was living with the working classes, with the proletariat. And so she was a philosopher, she was a mystic, but she was also very much engaged socially. And I read her, and I kind of wanted to emulate her. And so I got myself a job in a factory, assembling electric engines, electric motors. For a while, then ended up in other jobs, and ultimately found my way to Italy, to a community in Tuscany, international community of people who were trying to live the gospel, were trying to live according to the teachings of Christ. What was fascinating there was the fact that it was so international. There were people of all cultures, of all backgrounds, really. I remember in those days, at the same time, there was a guy who was a former Viet Cong, and there was a guy who was a former Marine. And they both had been in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, right? And now we're there together in that school. So, and there were many other experiences of that style. I was doing mime. I was a mime, and so I found myself in a performing group at some point, an international performing group, and started touring all over Europe. You know, I performed at La Scala di Milano. I performed at Supplier in Paris, and in many other places, and also in some fairgrounds that still smelled of manure, you know, in some parts of, of Germany. So it was quite many ups and downs, right? But it was a wonderful experience, performing in front of hundreds and thousands of people. Eventually, I was offered a job with a publishing house, which was, they were looking for somebody to run their beachhead operation that they were starting in the US. And I'd never been to the US, and I said, well, that's a great opportunity. I'll do that maybe for a few years, you know, and see where it leads. And so one day, here I am. I arrived in New York. I was staying in Brooklyn, and in Greenpoint, which was not, to me, it looked like just straight out of West Side Story, you know, with the chain link fences and so on and so forth. It was such a different world. I was living in the community for quite a while, but then at some point grew disenchanted with it and left. And I managed that publishing house for a few years, but then I had to move on. And well, where was I going to move on? I mean, I knew publishing now a little bit. So I saw a job offer as assistant purchasing manager with a professional publishing house, a legal publishing house. So I applied for the job, and I did get a job, but it was not assistant purchasing manager. It was assistant to the assistant purchasing manager. So it was pretty low on the totem pole. Right? And I got myself into it completely. Now, it was the dawn of the PC, so everybody had a PC on their desk, but nobody knew what to do with them. My job was to do estimating. They had hundreds of jobs every week, and you had to do estimates to figure out the cost on those big green ledgers with a pencil. It was impossible to keep up, right? And we had those computers. So I taught myself how to program, develop macros on what was then Lotus 123, right? Before. And I developed a completely turnkey operation, which all of a sudden allowed us to do accurate cost analysis, and our prices started dropping because our suppliers realized that we now had the means to analyze every job one by one, and so I became a hero. You know, I became the PC guru. Yeah.
So I gotta just jump in. You're now doing what you're doing without, like, college, basically. You're doing what you're doing because you lived life to its fullest.
Right. I mean, let me tell you, my travels in the Far East and in Asia was the best education I could ever had. Right? And I did take all the classes I needed to take along the way. Yeah. So I did take some accounting, some business courses, and so on and so forth, as I needed them. Right? And so I was an autodidact, right? I taught myself how to program as well, right? So that's how I programmed those turnkey estimating programs, right? So I became a hero there, in that first company, and saved the company really millions of dollars. Then I got a phone call. Thomson Professional Publishing was looking for somebody to head their production in one of their subsidiaries in Rochester, New York. And so I applied for the job and I got a job. And there I started doing the same thing, but also developed synergy. And then I realized that within Thomson, there were half a dozen companies that were doing the same thing. They were in the same business. And so I saw that there was tremendous potential economies of scales, even though they kept on operating separately. So I started really shaking the apple cart, making a lot of noise. One day, my boss, who was the CFO of that subsidiary, came to me and said, "Corporate doesn't know if they want to hire you or fire you." So I said, "Well, can I talk to them?" So the following week, I spoke to the corporate CFO and explained to him what I saw as a great potential for great cost savings and greater efficiency. So he looked at me and said, "Okay, go there and do it." And so here I was, synergizing across half a dozen companies, and we were very, very successful. It was an uphill battle with some people in the company, but we were very successful. And then the CEO of Thomson Professional Publishing became the CEO of Thomson Newspapers. Thomson Newspapers was 169 business units, 169 newspapers all across North America, US and Canada, right? And so he called me and said, "What you've done in Thomson Professional Publishing, I want you to come and do it at the Thomson Newspapers." So here I was, it was no longer 6 business units, it was 169 business units, right? And he knew nothing about the newspaper industry. I knew nothing about the newspaper industry. None of the people he brought with him knew anything about the newspaper industry. And so we were really like a blank slate, and we could really think out of the box. And we reinvented the newspaper group concept. We were bringing those papers by market, consolidating everything we could, and keeping just the publisher in front of the public, in front of the market, right? And so again, tremendous economies of scale. The rest of the industry, Gannett and others, looked at us and said, "Those guys don't know what they're doing. They're going to fall flat on their face." Well, 5 years later, this had become the new business model, and everybody was imitating what we had done. Wow. Then moved on from there. So in the meanwhile, I had met my wife, and we were having kids. I mean, I have 4 daughters who are now grown. They are all adults. One is a lawyer in London. One is a nurse in New Jersey. The other one is an engineer, environmental engineer, and the fourth one studied anthropology. So they are in various different sectors. So I met my wife, and that would be a whole story by itself, but we won't go into that today. And I was climbing the corporate ladder, right? So by then we had moved to Connecticut. We were living in Fairfield County, in Richfield, a beautiful place. Then at some point, I got a call from a headhunter. Quebecor Printing, which was the second largest printing conglomerate at the time, was looking for a head of global procurement, a corporate head of global procurement. So I went for the interview, and I was offered a fabulous job out of Montreal. And so I went to my boss at Thomson Newspapers, because I really loved the guy. I really loved working for him. And I said, "Dick, this is what happened. They offered me this. What should I do about it?" He said, "Look, we're selling this place," because Thomson Newspapers was being sold, right? We're selling this place, and those guys are growing like crazy. So it's a no-brainer. Go for it. And let's go and have a dinner with our wife and celebrate. And so I took the job. And here I was now in charge of buying 1 million tons of paper a year. That was $1 billion worth of paper, $250 million of ink. It was a really big operation. We had 110 major plants all over the world. Number 1 in Canada, number 2 in the US, number 1 in Europe, growing in Asia, growing in Latin America. It was really a huge operation. And I was on the road all the time. On an airplane all the time, flying the Concorde to Paris on occasion as well, because the Concorde was still flying back then. But it was also an empty life. I mean, I felt, when I look at my pictures back then, I was not happy. I was making a lot of money, but it was really using me up, from the inside, and all my spiritual aspirations, they were kind of on the back burner. Right? There was not much of that. I was just, the world is my oyster, and I own it, right? But it was not joyful. And but eventually, this ended, and because there was also some ethical issues that I was uncomfortable with, and so I decided to move on. And well, what am I going to do? I do the paper business, so I became a paper broker, buying and selling paper on the world stage, and that went for a while. I had found a fabulous niche. I was selling straw wrap, the paper that goes around drinking straws. That paper is actually cigarette paper. And I had found a mill in the UK. It was unbelievably cheap, and I could beat everybody on price, right? And so I was doing pretty well for a while, until the day in which I got a phone call from the UK. That mill was in the UK, and the guy said, "We got a problem." I said, "Oh, what kind of problem?" He probably missed a shipment. That stuff was coming in by container. We went bankrupt. We shut down the machines. And so here I was with clients everywhere, but no product. And nobody would sell me at that same price. And actually nobody would sell me, period, because everybody else was accounted for, right? So, what do I do next? And I read an article on business coaching. And I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." So that was in 2004. Business coaching was really a new concept. Coaching was a new concept in business. And so I said, "Well, I know business. I can do this." So I got myself certified with a group called the Professional Business Coach Alliance, and put up my sign, Claude Blanc, business coach, and just move on from there. And we will, I guess, continue this.
We'll continue that next stage.
Yeah.
A couple of, as I kind of, I mean, it's a wow that you got into these industries and learned what it's a wow. And yes, you took the courses as you needed them, but I mean, managing billion-dollar budgets, buying billions of dollars worth of something, it's so interesting. It's interesting also, just environmentally, we're doing away with, single-use plastics. The world is. So the paper for the straws, that's obsolete. It's just a changing world. I don't even want to get into that.
Right. So maybe I can tell you something about why, what drove me. Okay. Early on, when I was a young man, I saw a movie, Andrei Rublev, which was a movie by Tarkovsky. Tarkovsky is a Russian director who passed away a long time ago. Tarkovsky was still living in the Soviet Union at the time, right? He had not yet escaped. And he did that movie, which was about a monk who lived during the tough period when the Mongols were around and the noble Russians were exploiting the populations, and it was really an awful time in Russia. And this was like, from Tarkovsky's perspective, it was a cry for freedom in the Soviet environment, but he used the analogy, an historical analogy. So there was the story of that monk, Andrei Rublev, who had decided that he would stop painting. He was an icon painter, but he had decided to stop painting because he was so depressed for everything that was going on. Now, one day, a bunch of nobles go into a village that has been ravaged by the Mughal, and they are looking for the bell maker, because they are building a new cathedral and they are looking for the bell maker. And all they find is a little boy on a street corner crying, and everybody seems to be dead in that town. So I say, "Where is the bell maker?" And the boy say, "Well, the bell maker was my father, but he died." I say, "Oh, gee, what are we going to do?" But he told me all his secrets. I can build your bell. Yeah.
Oh,
And so they look at him and say, "You're just a boy. If you fail, we'll kill you." "Oh, I know all my secrets. I know all the secrets, my father." And he goes there and has hundreds of people working for him, much older than him, and he's managing that whole process, And eventually the bell gets built and the bell sounds beautifully. And Andrei Rublev, the painter, sees that. And the kid bursts starts crying and saying, "My father never told me these secrets. I just reinvented them as I went." And so Andrei Rublev, as a consequence, starts painting again and paints a very famous icon, which is the icon of the Trinity. Right? That movie impressed me tremendously because I thought, nothing is impossible. Never say no. And gosh, so many times. So when I was offered the job of Thomson Newspapers procurement operation, I got itchy all over my body. Right? I was because I was nervous, but I was not going to say no. I'm going to learn. I'm going to figure it out. Then when I went to Quebec, and it was 1 million tons of paper.
Oof.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to learn. I'm going to make it. And so never say no. Now some people say, "Oh, you've got to know how to say no." I don't know how to say no.
No.
To me,
So interesting.
It's always
So interesting. In a small way, I take what you just said, never say no. In a small way, 2.5 years ago, Rutgers University, a professor there came to me and asked me if I'd like to teach. It's like a coaching. I taught career explorations at Rutgers. I was already 74, and now they're asking me to begin a whole new career of teaching young people, smart kids, about navigating careers. And my first knee-jerk reaction is to say no. I mean, how come I'm 74 years old? I should be in a rocking chair on my front porch drinking prune juice, not getting in front of young people and teaching them. But subconsciously, subliminally, and with the support and the urging of my family, I didn't say no. I went ahead and became a teacher. So it's that same spirit that you just said, you never say no. By the way, I have one off topic, I guess, to wrap this session up. It's one of my Calvin questions. Actually, you don't have to answer it. You can or you can't. It doesn't make any difference, but it's an interesting question. So here it goes, Claude. Before I leave this earth, I won't be satisfied until I blank. And it's a great question for you because you've done it all.
Well, I just want to leave this earth having made it just a little bit better, and hopefully not worse.
Yes, yes, and your coaching is such a give back thing.
I think that that improvement happens step by step. So I hope that I will be a step forward in the evolution of humanity.
Okay. Well, that's a great way to do a wrap for this volume 2 of Claude Blanc. And we're going to sign off. Don't leave when we stop recording. I will do a little wrap, but for now, again, I thank you, Claude.
Thank you,
Gavin. So interesting. It's not that I identify with it. I actually, some of the things you've done, I would have liked to have done back in the 60s. I would have loved, but I didn't, and that's another story. But anyway, thank you for your passion and sharing your time with us, and you'll be back soon enough. So thank you, Claude.
Thank you.
I'm going to sign off. Thanks.